Wow, time sure flies, Johnny. I feel like we just did a podcast when we pretty much did. But it's the blue white breakdown. Bob Flounders talking here with Johnny McGonigal, the Penn State beat guys. Johnny and I are both down in Atlanta. It's a little bit late in the week. We've been down here as Penn State continues preparations for the Peach Bowl game, anticipated Peach Bowl game, noon Saturday on ESPN. Ole Miss, Penn State. I think it on paper to me. It really looks like one of the best matchups of the bowl season. Much like last year's Rose Bowl between Utah and Penn State. Really, I think a game that the fan base was looking forward to. But I think college football fans are looking forward to seeing this game on December 30th, Saturday afternoon before the semifinal playoffs. We're going to talk just about our thoughts on this matchup, who we think has the edge. Johnny, good to see you. Penn State, as we talk about this, it's late in the week. I think the last line I saw on this game was 3.5 Penn State. Money is moving in their direction. That doesn't mean that necessarily Penn State's going to win. But let's talk about the matchup. We've known about it for over a month. What strikes you most about Ole Miss versus Penn State, whether it's the matchup you're going to watch or maybe the matchup that you think, if there's one or two, or the players one or two, that are going to go a long way towards deciding the outcome?
Yeah, Bob, I think what's most interesting about this game, and it's kind of how it was billed from the get-go, even going back to the
Right.
introductory press conference that Sunday, that selection Sunday, that when we talked to James Franklin and we talked to Lane Kiffin, and opening those remarks was the CEO of the Peach Bowl, Gary Stokan, and
Yeah.
he billed it then as the best defense in the country versus one of the best offenses in the country. I do think that kind of holds firm, right? Like Ole Miss, their style, how they want to play under Lane Kiffin, with his offensive background, with their
Mm-hmm.
quarterback in Jackson Dart and their running back in Quinshon Judkins, and playing in the SEC, still being able to put up over 30 points a game. It's like that's kind of their identity, is to hit you on some big plays and create explosives and put up points. And Penn State, on the other hand, is like this is a team that is driven all year by their defense. And while they have put up points, that's not to necessarily short sell Drew Aller and what he did in his first year as starting quarterback. But everyone watching this Penn State team all year knows that it was the defense and all the talent that they have on that unit that got it to this point at 10-2, getting ready to play in a second consecutive New Year's Six bowl game, the fifth under James Franklin in his 10 seasons, which is a pretty good feat. Bob, obviously they haven't reached the college football playoff, and they'll have to wait for the 12 team next season. But still, this defense is just nasty and productive and chaotic and aggressive and disruptive and every adjective you want to throw at it. And I think that's kind of what we expect. Is like it's a something has to give. Whether it's if it's going to be a shootout, then it's Ole Miss. It kind of falls in Ole Miss's lap a little bit. If it's not, if it's more of a cagey affair, then I think Penn State will like its chances.
Yeah. I agree with you. I do think as this game plays itself out, I do think the Penn State offense has a chance to have a significant impact on the outcome just because of their style of play, what they want to do. We got to see how they're going to play under the direction of the offensive coordinators, Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell, the last two games of the regular season. I mean, I know it was Rutgers and I know it was Michigan State. It certainly wasn't Ohio State and Columbus or dealing with Michigan at Beaver Stadium. Too much easier defenses to work against, but I really thought the way that they handled the offense, the way that they got more people involved was significant. I think you're going to see that again on Saturday against Ole Miss. But Johnny, I have to say, you and I were at Ford Field to watch the regular season finale the day after Thanksgiving, where Penn State just put it on Michigan State 42-0. I know I don't want to say that Michigan State's offense was checked out of the game, but I thought they got discouraged very easily in that game, and it just got worse and worse and snowballed, and it was just as dominant a performance as you will see by a Penn State defense. But what struck me, Penn State had an athletic, fast defense all season on grass, but they were at least a step faster indoors, no weather, on a fast track It's going to be a really fast track at noon on Saturday indoors at Mercedes-Benz. I think that's an advantage for this Penn State defense. I really think um, trying to deal with this Penn State defense on tape and then watching them and their speed in person, it's an adjustment for offenses. And I know that Lane Kiffin knows offense. I know he's got a good quarterback and a very good running back in Quinshon Judkins. I hope I said that right. But to me, the speed of Penn State's defense, to me, I think is the storyline that I'm going to continue to follow. I know this isn't Michigan State, but I do think they're even faster on a surface like this. And I think it's going to be for 4 quarters with their depth, even without Chop Robinson, it's going to be a huge task for an Ole Miss offensive line that I don't believe is very good.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chop, him declaring for the NFL draft and opting out, a projected first-round pick right now, and for obvious reasons because he was so integral in that fast, twitchy defense that Manny Diaz, defense coordinator, who's now the head coach at Duke, he won't be here calling plays either. But I do still maintain my confidence in this Penn State defense, even without Manny, even without Chop. Johnny Dixon, as we record this, has not announced anything, but I don't believe he's here for practices. So, they'll be without him as well for the Peach Bowl. But you still look at what they have up front in Adisa Isaac. Opposite him, Denai Dennis Sutton, I think, is poised for a big game. At linebacker, Curtis Jacobs is playing despite declaring for the draft. Abdul Carter, I think, has a real chance to have a nice game here. You talk about that speed, right, Bob?
Mm-hmm.
Sideline to sideline, when Abdul is keyed in and there's few linebackers in the country, I think, that has his just natural ability to get to the ball. And I think that's going to be crucial, not only in stopping Quinshon Judkins, one of the best tailbacks in the country, but Jackson Dart, a quarterback who I think is probably the best quarterback Penn State will play this year. You look at the two best teams they played, Ohio State and Michigan. McCord is gone, and after transferring out of Ohio State, and I don't think JJ McCarthy is really all that. I mean, he's more of a game manager. Jackson Dart can beat you with his arm, he can beat you with his legs, and I think a player like Abdul, and you look at Adisa and how well he's done this year, just in space, chasing people down. I think Penn State has the speed on defense that while those guys might get you for a play or two, I do think that they have what it takes to not only keep them in check, but really throw them off kilter, get after them, apply that pressure and that chaos in the backfield that Penn State has made a staple this year, leading the country in sacks and ranking 3rd in tackles for loss.
Speed at all 3 levels of the defense has been a constant for Penn State. The fact that how they play their defense, how they commit to their depth, they've developed players behind the stars that are now almost looking like stars or breakout players, either in this game or early next year. I mean, it's too bad that we're not going to see Chop one more time. But like you said, there's so many good players on this Penn State defense. I wanted to bring up one thing with you. I checked, and it didn't surprise me. Other than Blake Corum, I think he was the only runner that got over 100 yards all season. No surprise. He's a hell of a player. But they did face some pretty good backs. This guy, to do what he did in the SEC after 2 years, I think Herschel Walker's the only other guy in the SEC that's done it. He ran for over 1,500 yards last year, 1,000 yards this year, and I alluded to the fact the offensive line I don't think is the same as it was last year, and he's been a marked man. This is a big guy, and what I want to see is I know that he is going to be tough for one guy to bring down. The physical challenge he's going to present, this fast, athletic Penn State defense, is going to be something to see. But if they can discourage him and limit what he can do, I know that this is a good quarterback that they're going to see. But I think the offensive line kind of negates some of his talents. I'm talking about Ole Miss's. I really think this game comes down to how much damage Judkins can do and kind of maybe take some of the pressure off this quarterback, because if they're in long yardage situations against this defense with that offensive line, I don't think it's going to go well for Ole Miss. But I think Judkins and what he can do or what he can't do is another big storyline in this game.
Definitely, Bob. I mean, it only takes one crease for
Yeah.
a running back like that to hit and then take it 40, 50 yards
Yeah.
and can flip a game on its head at that point. And I think one thing to keep an eye on when we talk about Penn State's linebackers and what they have in that front seven, but specifically at linebacker, we've seen it this year when Curtis Jacobs isn't on the field or if Abdul Carter isn't on the field and they're getting
Yeah.
a breather, for a series.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen big plays come out of those scenarios on
Mm-hmm.
those drives. And I think just that's something that Penn State fans who have watched this team all year will recognize when that second unit comes in. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's the fits aren't right, or obviously that some of those guys don't have the speed necessarily that Abdul or Curtis might have. And if Curtis is on a snap count, I think that could play a factor as well. So there's something to keep an eye on there.
Yeah.
But I also we talked about the front seven. I'm pretty confident in the safety play that Penn State has, specifically with KJ Winston has an opportunity to have a big game after coming on strong down the stretch. He looks like a star in the making for the 2024 season. I do think Penn State has what they need defensively to win this game. Despite Chop not being there, despite Manny not calling plays, it's going to be Anthony Poindexter as a co-defensive coordinator with Rob Smith, who's an analyst on the staff and has a lot of defensive coordinator play calling experience at the Power 5 level in the past. So I think they're in good hands for this game on the defensive side of the ball. I'm curious, Bob, you mentioned the offense earlier and maybe their ability to dictate play or, obviously have a say in the game, right? We have to look at both sides of the ball. What are you expecting from Penn State's offense here going into this Peach Bowl?
Yeah, and I do think that I think Penn State's offense is going to have a say in this game. A couple things just to watch for. Under the co-OCs after Penn State moved on from Mike Yurcich, they talked about it. They made a commitment to get more of their skill guys involved in the offense, and I think it's a valid point because I do think I don't know. As I'm not taking away anything from Mike Yurcich as a play caller, but I just felt I was surprised we didn't see more of some guys during the season, and I think it really kind of hurt their development. I think that these guys are committed to playing rotations, and I think that you're going to see some players show up in this game that showed up differently, even in the Michigan State game. Now, I know Michigan State is not Ole Miss, but things to look for, right? Bo Prabula, I think, is definitely, you're going to see a Bo Prabula package on a fast track, and they're going to have to account for him and Drew on the field at the same time. Two other players, just to note, I know it sounds weird to be talking about Nicholas Singleton, but the way that they were able to use him, especially in the last game against Michigan State, he flashed as a receiver, and it's just something as simple as trying to free him up in space. Like he made a 50-yard play as a receiver early in that game that I think really opened things up for that offense. It was more of a short ball out in the flat. He turned it into a 50-yard catch, and I think that did wonders for his confidence. He got his only 100-yard game of the season. They did keep him in late, but he is a guy that I think you're going to see him used a little bit differently again in the Peach Bowl to kind of complement what Katron Allen can do. And Katron Allen, one thing I'm looking for is he's about 150 yards away from 1,000. And I think it's possible. And I think if he gets 20 carries and he gets loose, it would be really nice to see that. But I also want to just bring up the name Amari Evans because you can say what you want about Rutgers, the team that Penn State played before the Michigan State game. It was the first game that Ty and J1 called plays. He had a chunk play in that game. He got open down the field. We saw him in the rotation, and he had a big play in the Michigan State game where Drew Aller threw it 60 yards in the air, hit him in stride. Just his presence and his speed, they talked about it. J1 talked about it. Ty talked about it. It impacts the defense. It forces you to play different because he can run by secondaries. What we saw in the blue-white game wasn't a fluke, right? He really is a threat if you get him the ball. I think you're going to see him, if he's healthy, continue to make plays. And I do know Keaton Ellis down here at one of the media availabilities that we were able to cover this week talked about another guy that is healthy now is Harrison Wallace, who last played in the Indiana game. I think he hurt his shoulder. It was an upper body injury. And that was really a wrap on the regular season. He is feeling frisky in practice, and he's starting to look like he did at the start of the season, where he was a guy that could impact the game, gives Penn State another option in the passing game. So Harrison Wallace, Omari Evans, and just what they do with Singleton and also Bo Prabula, I think this is going to be a little bit of a different Penn State offense that had gotten stale, I think, at midway through the season before they fired Yursich.
Yeah, I mean, Bob, you said at the start of your answer there that so when you talk about Mike Yursich, like no knock on him or whatever,
Yeah.
I think it very much is a knock.
him.
I think it very much is a knock on him, and this is not something where it's like let's dance on the guy's grave, whatever.
Yeah.
It did get stale. It was hard to watch, especially against Ohio State, Michigan. I mean, that was brutal.
Yeah.
That was brutal to watch. But even early in the Northwestern game, like early in some of these games where you're like, you should be really asserting yourself right now. You have exponentially more talented players.
Yeah.
You saw Johnny Newton, for Illinois, obviously blow up their spot a little bit, and you'll have that. It is what it is. But Omari Evans, after being like a spring darling and starting in the spring game for what that's worth, really was not a factor at all this year until until the co-offensive coordinators took over. I thought the running game was stale and predictable. And again, it's Rutgers and Michigan State, right? But I just think this offense has been more unpredictable and just better since Mike Yursich was fired. And you look at the running game specifically with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen.
Yeah.
It's interesting because Ole Miss is 73rd in the FBS in rushing yards allowed per game, Bob, at around 152 per game. Guess what team is 2 spots ahead of them at 71? It's Michigan State.
Yeah.
And we saw what Penn State did to Michigan State, in the regular season finale with, Katron Allen doing his thing and Nick Singleton really getting going.
Yeah.
And I know that, just like the Big Ten, the competition in the SEC is tough. And so you're facing a lot of those teams and you're bound to have a bad game or two. But whereas you look at Penn State's rush defense, best in the country, 69 yards per game, like they didn't really have a bad game outside of the Michigan game. I think Penn State will have an opportunity to run against this Ole Miss defense. And what that does, too, is not only produce and wear down a defense and potentially demoralize a defense, Bob, but it's control the clock. You're able to dictate the game with a running game and with a defense that travels. And I think that's Penn State's path to success. Don't get too cute on offense. You might have a Bo Prabula package in there, and I understand that. And I'll be interested. My interest will be piqued.
Sure.
But if you're able to just hit in the run game and let your defense take care of the rest, I think you're coming out with an 11-win season and yet another New Year's Six bowl win.
Yeah. Before we get to our picks, I just think that it's an easy narrative to say it's like it's strength on strength, Penn State's defense versus the Ole Miss offense. You dig a little deeper. What you said is true. I think Penn State's offense. Sure, it doesn't take a backseat to the defense. Yes, it does. But I think this is a more effective offense. I think they're rested. I think they're fresh, and I think they have a better grasp of the play callers have a better grasp of how to attack an opponent with all of the chess pieces they have. I do think the offense is going to have a big say, especially when it comes to time of possession. I think they can lean on this Ole Miss defense. Ole Miss's defense, when they played Georgia and Alabama, they weren't high score. That was not a high scoring offense. This Penn State defense is definitely in the same ballpark as Georgia's. I think it's better than Alabama's. I know that's a big statement, but I do not expect to see Ole Miss in the upper 20s or even in the 30s in this game, unless there's been some mistakes made and there's been some turnovers in short fields. But I just don't know. I don't know that Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is a good team, but this Penn State defense, I think, it could be another game like the Alabama game and Georgia game for this Ole Miss team. But I just wanted to get to you real quick, and you can throw it in. A couple of guys I'm excited to see that I think could play major roles in this game. That you talked about, KJ Winston. Couldn't agree with you more. I think he has been maybe one of the, if not the most improved player. It's a short list of players ahead of him that have gotten better as a young player. We mentioned Omari Evans for sure. Cam Miller at corner. They have some good receivers. I don't know how much you mentioned. I don't know that we're good. I don't think Johnny Dixon's going to be on the field. Kalen King's a good player, but I think Cam Miller's going to have a huge role in this game against the Ole Miss passing game. And also, the one linebacker I think we overlooked that I thought got better, is the middle linebacker, Kobe King, especially against a physical runner like Judkins, who's 210 pounds. I think he's going to have a big role and a big say in this outcome, along with Abdul and Curtis Jacobs, as long as we see him. We'll see some other guys. But I wouldn't forget about Kobe, Cam Miller, uh, and Omari Evans as well. Are there a couple players you're looking forward to seeing before we get to the pick?
I like those, Bob, and just building off the Cam Miller bit of it. When we talked to Terry Smith on signing day, because he's not only the corners coach but the defensive recruiting coordinator, and there's only so much you can ask about some of those players. So naturally, the conversation when we were talking to him shifted to the Peach Bowl in his corner room, and he said that Cam Miller's going to be playing a lot, and I think Johnny Dixon, there's a part in there with that, and then also with Kalen King being down here, he hasn't, again, as we record this, hasn't announced anything, but he's going to be going off to the NFL, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's on a snap count as well. And so I think you're going to see a lot of Cam Miller, and I've liked what I've seen from him, Bob, and I know you have as well. And so I would expect him to live up to it. He has a real opportunity here against a good Ole Miss offense. And then I guess just on top of that, just something else to keep an eye on. We've talked about Olu Fashanu and whether or not he's going to play. He hasn't really made that clear. If he does play, he is going to be very limited. I would kind of not expect him to play, but if he doesn't, or if he is on a very short leash or short snap count, then you're looking at Drew Shelton. You're looking at Javen Williams potentially at tackle. So just keep an eye on that, as the game goes on. But I like Penn State in this one, Bob. I do. And this is interesting because I like this matchup because it feels like a first round game next year. In a 12-team playoff. You look at Ole Miss. I mean, they're 10-2, going for their first 11-win season in program history. So you can make the argument that this game means more, matters more to them because they're trying to make history. They're trying to do something their program has never done in terms of winning 11 games. But they lost to Alabama and Georgia this year. You look at Penn State; they lost to Michigan and Ohio State. But they've taken care of business elsewhere. And so I think both teams have had really impressive years. Didn't necessarily get the big win that either of them probably wanted or had hoped for coming into the year. But this feels like next year you'll be seeing Ole Miss at Beaver Stadium or a game like that. And so I do think these players will be up for this. But I've got Penn State for all the reasons that we've discussed. This defense, this running game. I've got Penn State 24-21. So I believe that's the under. And depending on when you get the line, or when you got it, it could be a little iffy there.
Yeah. Hey, I think Penn State fans know that we're not homers. Like we've had when we think Penn State's in trouble, we've said it. I did think they were a little in trouble against Michigan, and it proved it to be that way. I think this game's going to be like you said. I think it's going to be a little bit more low scoring than some people think. I actually picked Penn State 23-16. Just one other thing to throw in there, even against Ohio State and Michigan, Penn State was number 1 in the country in turnover margin. They were really good at protecting the football, whether it was fumbles. They had some fumbles on special teams, actually, or the number would be better. But, I mean, Drew's pretty cautious with the ball, right? And the running backs are very good at holding onto the ball. I think they were plus 18 or plus 19 going into the game. Ole Miss is plus 9. But I do think turnovers could be at a premium in this game. I think that also favors Penn State. It also favors maybe an under. I think the only way the game goes over is if there are some short fields, and I'm not sure there will be short fields. I think both punters are going to pin the other. I think both offenses are going to have to go a long way to score. I think you're going to see some field goals in this game. I got it 23-16. I do think Penn State's better. I feel really good about their depth, and I do think, Johnny, because of the way they played some of their young players, you're going to see some players make some plays in this game that are going to have the fans excited about next year because their depth is really good. I think you're also going to see some players that have not had chances to play in the second half make some plays. I like Penn State because of its depth, because of its team speed, and I think the offense with the co-offensive coordinators is going to be more effective because we use the word stale. It was what fit during the dying days of Mike Yurcich's reign as offensive coordinator. Fresh look, more players, and I think you're going to see some players step up.
Yeah, and then just one more thing to add on that. I agree with everything you said there, Bob. Like, I do like Penn State's red zone offense and what they've been able to do this year from a touchdown conversion standpoint. It feels like when they get down there, whether it's through a bow
Yeah,
package, what we've seen late, or the T formation, or just handing the ball off in any set to Katron Allen and letting him run over like four guys
yeah,
en route to the end zone. I think they've done a good job from that standpoint. And so while opportunities may be limited in a game like
yeah,
this, depending on on this game script that both of us feel like it's going to be kind of a more drag it out kind of game, I like Penn State to finish in the red zone when they have their opportunities. They haven't really turned the ball over in the red zone. They've been very efficient when they get down there for the most part, and so I think that whichever team is able to take those
yeah,
opportunities when they drive the field like that
yeah.
and not settle for field goals. I like Penn State to come out on top in that category and in the game overall.
Yeah. One more thing before we go, Johnny. Just make sure you stay out of trouble in Atlanta between now and noon kickoff. I
No
know
promises. No promises.
Atlanta is a big city. I know you live in Philly. We're not in State College. We're not in Harrisburg. It's tempting. There's a lot to do. So we both need to stay out of trouble, and we'll talk to you guys at some point during early in the off season about what we've seen and what we thought about the game.